Hey, Thomas.
My sound was muted on my laptop. It's like I saw your lips move. Why can't I hear it? Oh,
Are you feeling better?
yeah, I am. I am. But I'm still at home today.
Yeah.
So
Being cautious.
no,
Oh.
just I had another kind of medical thing that I had to take care of today. So
Okay.
hey, how's it, Wes?
Aloha. Hopefully everybody had a good weekend.
Yup, yup.
Yeah. Was a nice weekend.
Uma, I haven't forgotten about you. I owe you an email. This is Banette.
No worries. Thanks, Manette.
I'm gonna get this out of the way now because it seems like I my slides never work on the first try. You can see it now, though. You can see the first slide. Okay. And did it just change? Did it go to the next slide? No. I don't know why it always does that.
Because I think you can choose the PowerPoint screen and then you can also choose the actual presentation screen. I'm not sure. That's what's happened to me in the past. Sometimes
Okay.
I just choose the wrong screen to share.
Well, it seems like I choose oh, I see what you're talking about. Okay. Did it just change then? Uh-huh. I guess I clearly wasn't paying any attention when I was selecting my share screen. Hmm.
Well, that's the confusing thing, right? Is because there's the actual PowerPoint app and then there's the presentation. Like they set them up as different screens, I guess.
Screens, yeah. Well, somebody asked me to share my screen in Teams the other day,
Oh.
and I was like, I was completely lost. I was like, wait a minute, I don't know that I've ever done it in Teams before. Yeah. Teams is not my friend usually. For whatever reason, my computer has something against Teams.
Yeah.
Well, we are at the top of the hour, and I know today we only have 60 minutes. So I do want to get started because Thomas and I have been working on a presentation for today, and what we put together really does take an hour. So we want to be sure that we have enough time to get through it and to get feedback from everybody. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. Thank you. I recognize multiple people who have been to more than one of these meetings, so I really appreciate your input, but also your willingness to continue to contribute to this because it's certainly a process. It's the not the type of thing that happens quickly. So I really do appreciate the investment that all of you made. Just very quickly to recap, I'm Dan Durger. I'm the director of the Pacific Center for Advanced Technology Training. And I co-lead this particular pillar with Thomas, and I'll let Thomas introduce himself.
Aloha kako, Thomas Chalk. I'm with the Creative Industries Division in the Department of Business, Economic Development, and Tourism. And yeah, well, just really enjoyed. I'm so lucky I got to work with Dan on this because, yeah, so appreciate the leadership you've offered, Dan.
Oh no, that's nice of you to say, Thomas, but it's been a really good partnership. So again, I thank you and to Banette and her team who have been really supportive throughout all of this. Now, everybody on the call, you hopefully you know that after today, our next stop is July 9th. And on July 9th, we're meeting in person at Honolulu Community College in the Louis Room there. and we will be presenting. So what Thomas and I wanted to do today was share with you a version of what we plan to present on July 9th, so we can get your feedback on that presentation, and to ensure that we've captured the comments and the ideas that this group have been sharing in a way that that reflects kind of a common understanding of what we're all talking about when we talk about this first pillar. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Let's see if I can do it the correct way, Thomas. Okay. So hopefully everybody's seeing the first slide there, and hopefully when I go to the second one, you can see the next slide too. So just want to do a little bit of a framing for what we're going to be talking about. And there's 5 sections that are going to be part of what we're doing. So we've allowed 10 minutes for each one of those 5 sections. And that's the bulk of what we're going to be doing today. Of course, if you have a question, please raise your hand. The way I'm going to sort of set it up a little bit, and then Thomas is going to facilitate the actual conversations, and then I'll be a timekeeper, kind of moving us along so we can get it all done in an hour. So I know everybody's familiar with these objectives, but what we wanted to do was take our objective, which is alignment with economic growth, and we wanted to break it down into the components that we're going to be presenting about when we meet the whole group on July 9th. So the first thing that this group has talked about, and I know there's been a little bit of really discussion that I appreciated about when we say workforce development, what are we really talking about? What does that mean? There's a lot of different ways we can look at it. So that's one thing we want to bring up on the 9th, and that's the first thing we'll talk about today. The next part of our objective is about labor shortages. So we've talked about the fact that there, of course, are labor shortages. We've talked about some data we can collect, and we've talked about next steps, what it might look like if we focus on labor shortages. So we're going to share our summary of how we have kind of compiled all of the ideas that we've gotten out of the last few calls with this group. And then what do we mean when we talk about a living wage? I feel like we focused a fair amount on this piece, that this was an interesting piece to everybody. We talked about living wage. What does that mean? What does that look like? And what would the next steps be? There is the point about economic diversification. I know that consumed a little bit of our time last time when we talked about that. So we want to show you our summary of that discussion. And then lastly, this is something we maybe haven't talked about specifically, but I feel like it's been the undercurrent through all of our discussions about what are the jobs for the future? What does it look like? What jobs that currently exist are no longer going to exist? And what are the new jobs that are going to take their place? So we want to get started with that workforce development idea. And again, keep in mind that what we're presenting now is what, or at least a version of this, is what we hope to present on July 9th. So when we talked about workforce development and what it could mean as we move forward, we talked about a couple of things. One thing is that we could focus on existing sectors that already have established sector partnerships. And that would be the ones that are listed there. And those, the bulk of those are a result of the Good Jobs Challenge grant that we received. So that we could, when we're talking about moving forward and we're talking about identifying workforce development areas, we could focus just on those areas. Another thing we could do is focus on those areas that have those established sector partnerships, and then add a limited number of new sectors, which is sort of what we just have recently done with transportation. We had the other sectors and we just recently added transportation. So we could look and see, well, what are the next ones we should be adding? A different way, and this is from the feedback that we got from the group over the last couple of calls, we could focus only on new in-demand sectors that do not currently have a sector partnership. And then the last thing we heard was we could focus on struggling sectors that may or may not have a sector partnership. So those are sort of the options that we had. And when we talk about identifying workforce development areas, where do we start? Should we focus on one of these? Or maybe it's even something other than these. So I'm going to stop sharing this screen so we can have a discussion with everybody. And we want to spend the next 10 minutes or so talking about those 4 options. And, maybe on July 9th, we present those 4 options and that's what we present. But if there's one or another that we feel like we're kind of leaning towards, I would want to say that at our July 9th presentation. Or if there's something that's not there, if there's another option that this group would like to consider, we'd like to hear about that now. So interested to hear what people have to say.
Hey, good morning, Dan. Good to see
Hey,
you and
Marshall.
Thomas and
Hey, Marshall.
Kazu on here. Break the ice. Some of the feedback that we're getting that we've been participating in is that the sector strategies may be limiting to the kind of the breadth of economic development that could take place in the state of Hawaii. Just some feedback that we've been kind of hearing and some chatter that's been circulating around. So I don't know how that would change the sector approach. Personally, I think the sector approach works really well. It's very tangible and it's something that our state is moving towards. But just a bit of feedback I think that we're hearing from some other meetings.
Yeah, thanks, Marshall. And I know that came up in our discussions, last time, where some people were finding that maybe the focus on the existing sectors was too limiting. But of course, it is an option to focus on those. But I don't know what this group's thoughts are, if that is the best way forward, or if focusing on brand new ones, struggling ones, in demand sectors, if that's what we should be focusing on. We could certainly recommend that on the 9th, kind of offer that list of options I just shared. But if this group feels strongly about one over another one, we could certainly recommend that, as the group's thoughts, if people
Hi.
think it's
Oh,
worth it.
sorry. Hi, this is Leslie
Hey,
Wilkins.
Leslie.
I apologize. I'm on my phone and driving, but I'm hands-free.
Mhm.
Um, you know, um, I do agree that maybe we should look a little a little broader. But what I do know, with all of the investment that went into the Good Jobs Hawaii sectors, the strong sector partnerships, the curriculum that has been developed, the employers that are seeing the importance of that. When funding goes away, often strength dies. And I think that we should figure out a way to sustain that momentum. So I think it should be a focus, but not absolutely exclusive. That the workforce is changing all the time, and especially in these tumultuous times. So we, I think we need to sustain what we have, sustain that momentum. Do not lose that investment, but not make it exclusive. Look at other pathways as well.
Yeah, I don't see anyone from the chamber on the call, but I have had a conversation with Vanessa from the chamber recently that kind of echoes what Leslie said, along the lines of, sector partnerships, like, and how the chamber is trying to pivot from, where the Good Jobs funding was pretty pivotal in getting those sectors started up. And now the chamber is, they just announced what the fund, for that employers can start to participate in, funding those sector partnerships. I mean, I think Marshall, you maybe can speak better to that than I can, but I believe that is kind of generally the strategy, or the way the approach is, as we move forward with the sector partnerships, that there will be more of at least a public-private kind of partnership kind of thing for funding, if not, fully going over to the private sector to fund these sector partnerships, because ultimately it's supposed to be serving them. But yeah, I just wanted to share that conversation I had with Vanessa along those lines. Leslie, thank you for sharing that.
Great. Does anybody else have any other thoughts? Because I think I'm starting to tie some loose ends up with this one. But if anybody has any other thoughts about what we would present on the 9th, I would like to hear it. Okay. Then I it seems then that we could present these four options because these are the options that we've been talking about, but stress Leslie's point in particular about we don't want to throw away the work that has already been done. That's certainly not the intent of any of this. But at the same time, we do know that there's an understanding that we want to focus on in-demand sector, new in-demand sectors, or those struggling sectors that would benefit, and that there would be more economic diversity if we focused on those struggling sectors. But it's always a balancing act, of course, because there's limited resources and limited time, and you have to pick a starting point. But these seem to be the good points, I think, to present when we present on the 9th. So unless anybody has a final thought about this, we're going to move on to the next area. Does anybody have anything they'd like to say before we move on?
Dan, if I could just kind of last minute kind of wondering
Yeah.
from those in the group, it seems like whether I'm kind of interpreting Marshall's or Leslie's comment, it's not just about like the sectors, but is it also about kind of, I'm just wondering if there's like this transferable skills, kind of like more foundational skills conversation that we're having instead of like it's not necessarily that we don't want the sector partnerships, but it's like when we go so deep into specific sector skills building that we maybe miss the mark when it comes to more of those foundational or transferable skills. Is that kind of where the conversation is coming from, you think, or am I totally off base on that?
Hey, Thomas, just some feedback. No, I actually think the sector partnerships do a great job at really vetting out what those really intentional and foundational skills are. And they work really, really well. I think sometimes some of the feedback is that, well, if we continue to focus specifically on these sector partnerships, there's still a lot of area of need that can contribute to economic growth that might be limited or left out of that conversation. But the sector partnerships have been a proven model and been proven to be very, very effective for promoting economic development, for putting industry first, and then bringing educators and community-based organizations and stakeholders around a single initiative. And so I think that's really the momentum to continue to drive home. And as Dan said, what is it? How does it expand, or do we look specifically at maybe some sector partnerships that can be further developed if they're struggling, or if there's an area of forecasting need? I think based on another key area would be, as Leslie chimed in, the SEDS, Community Economic Development Strategies, is another really good place for us to start. And I think that would give a good push forward and try to open up the envelope a bit more. But again, I think the sector partnership model has been really successful, as we've seen within the Good Jobs Challenge project and Good Jobs Hawaii initiative.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Marshall. I always appreciate, I know you're super close to it, so I appreciate your insider knowledge. So thanks for sharing. Okay, let's move on. I've got one eye on the clock always. So let's move on to the piece of our objective that specifically calls out labor shortage. So in the past, when we were talking last time in particular about data and what data we could collect and what that data collection piece and having data points to move us forward so we could have evidence of success. We talked about these particular things, and I know there's more, but we talked about we could look at job listings to see what are the jobs that seem to have the most postings. We could look at unfilled job listings. So those job listings that keep repeating that employers find it really hard to fill. And we had talked about potentially doing some sort of survey of employers. And I know, Thomas, when we were talking about this last week, just the two of us, I know DBET does those types of things, where they survey employers and they get the information from employers. So again, as we talked about as a group, what does this look like? We did talk about that with labor shortage, we'd have to work very closely with group number 2, which is about teaching and training. So once labor shortage areas were identified, then we would work with group number 2 to say, okay, do these programs exist? And if they do exist to train people to, close that labor shortage gap, if they do exist, then how do we get more students into them? If they don't exist, how do we create them? Because I know I feel like sometimes there's a fallacy that people are like, well, there's no training for that. It's like there is training for that. People just aren't interested in it, or people just aren't signing up for it for whatever reason. So we need to figure that piece of it out. And I think, Thomas, this is partially what you were getting at earlier and what Marshall was talking about, this idea of working across all of the sectors. So not just focusing on one particular identified sector, but working across all of them to identify those labor shortages that cut across all of the sectors, or that kind of present themselves in all of the sectors. So that's what we talked about. And again, that's Thomas and I kind of distilling multiple conversations into one slide that we can present on the 9th. But certainly interested to hear what the group has to say about that labor shortage piece. If we're capturing what the group has said, and if that's something, the way that we're presenting it now, to show the rest of the group on the 9th. So any thoughts that
Yeah.
people have about that?
Hi, this is Leslie Wilkins again from METB. I will have to get off the call about 10:45, so I'm going to talk early.
Yeah,
So
sure.
I think one of the things we need to do on capturing labor shortages, there are many, many data tracking, capturing entities and technology going on. So I would love this group to put together a summit or survey data collectors to see how we leverage it. So UHERO, DBED, Dr. Chen, MEDB just invested in a new predictive modeling tool called Lightcast, which scrapes data all over the place, disaggregates data, which is what we needed for Maui Nui and the wildfire recovery, and does predictive modeling on what kind of workforce is needed. I also know that HireNet is used a lot by employers to, put what jobs they have on Indeed, whatever we need to. I think we all need to work together to kind of aggregate that data, because there's a lot of efforts already going on.
Yeah.
And can I
So
add on, this is Uma, if we want to effectively plan on the workforce development, there's a couple of steps that we have to take from a strategy perspective. Like, we have to assess what our current capabilities are. And then we kind of have to forecast what is our future needs for Hawaii. Once we understand that, then we can identify the skill gaps. And then, by anticipating the talent shortages, we can plan for recruitment and training and development, so that, because it's going to be ever evolving demand, right? It's always going to change. So let's try to look at a forecast of 3 to 5 years. We can, or even like 3 years, because things are changing every day. And then what we can do is then develop personalized training and development programs that match that capability that is current and also adapts to future shortages. And then you can utilize training and technology to so it's like a step-by-step process, right? So I think we just need to go through those steps one by one. That's it.
I had a question.
Yeah.
When you mentioned the employer survey, would that include emerging technologies, innovative things that might need a skill set but doesn't necessarily have a job description yet? If I throw something dumb out there like AI prompt engineer, just something innovative that could be something that could be added to this. And like everybody else was saying, then we could set the training up to get people into that. I'm not sure if that's already embedded in your employer survey though, because I didn't want to double up on anything you're already doing.
Yeah, and we weren't referencing any specific employer survey. It just was as a result of these conversations we've been having, these are the things that have just been coming up. So, and I think, certainly to Leslie's points about there's a lot that's already happening, and that there needs to be, to make the most out of it, that there would need to be someone who takes on the responsibility to start pulling all of that together, because there's a lot of great stuff that is happening, but if everybody doesn't know about it, then you're not maximizing the impact of that. And Thomas, I don't know if you want to speak to DBET's role in that and what that looks like.
Um, yeah, I know, Leslie mentioned Dr. Tian. I believe Dr. Tian is retired or is retiring. So I know that we're in the process of interviewing and hiring a new administrator for a read in DBED. So I can't speak specifically to what the new direction is going to be for Reed. I do know that, you know, couple like kind of observations I have is like one of the things that Dan and I talked about when we specifically got to this topic was this idea that what we're trying to do is within the locus of control of this specific pillar within the Workforce Development Council, and how there are obviously some systemic issues that we could address, but that's not necessarily this group's Kuleana, right? Like, we're not going to talk about housing because we can't solve that. But what we can do is, I love Leslie's idea of like, hey, we can probably gather those key data people that would have like access to those data points. We could be the group that formulates a survey that, like what Wes was talking about, right? That kind of makes sense for employers, as we, kind of following what Uma was talking about strategically, identifying the shortages and the skills and those kinds of things. And the other thing is, just remember the fifth slide that we're going to get to hopefully later this morning is jobs of the future. And so, when Wes was talking about that, like, I think that is definitely, we're seeing it, like it's happening right now. I love that Uma kept the window to like 3 years, because things are changing right now. Like, we don't even know, and they're changing so fast. So yeah, I can't, like I said, Dan, I can't speak specifically to Reed's direction moving forward, just because we don't have that administrator yet. But yeah, as soon as I know, I'm sure we'll, with Jimmy and Dane wanting more of these kind of data points, we're gonna wanna be able to speak to these data points and gathering all the data folks together, like Leslie said.
Great. Bennett,
Bennett?
did you have a comment?
Yes, and I love the discussion going on, and I thought I was going to be a fly on the wall and allow things to evolve, but I did want to have a comment, particularly on how the proposals that you folks are espousing, and how perhaps as we're talking about alignment, Thomas, is there a possibility that some of the things, the initiatives that you talk about here, can also be embraced by DBED? So then it becomes really an integrated approach, so that, we're, in as much as we are within our own enclave, are pursuing these initiatives, it should be a common interest. It should be a common objective also for DBED to pursue such things. I'm not sure exactly where that would lie, where that Kuleana should lie, but is there a way where, as we move forward, because we hope to see that this is not just a one-off, right? That this is, at the end of July 9th, or even when the plan is submitted, the modified plan, that hopefully we can incorporate some of these initiatives in the modified unified plan, which is due next year for Department of Labor, to the Department of Labor, that we could actually say there is a movement towards towards an integrated approach with the other players in the room, whether it's be DBED or other policy agencies. What do you think of that idea?
No, I agree. I think I I feel like I can't I don't want to speak specifically like I don't want to speak exactly the words that I know what Jimmy and Dane would say, but I feel pretty confident saying that that's what they want. They want more alignment between at least that's what they're hoping from me in the role that I play on the Workforce Development Council is that we can kind of align what DBED is doing with what the Workforce Development Council is doing. And I think Uma and I can probably tag team that and push that message up the flagpole up towards the director's office. So yeah. Dan, we are kind of needing to move forward.
Yeah,
Any
no, but I love this because this is exactly what Thomas and I were hoping to get out of this because I think for this slide, when we talk about this on July 9th, what I want to be sure that we reflect from the groups talking just right now is this need to pull a bunch of disparate data sources together, that somebody needs to be doing that and working on that, and this need for alignment with this work, because there are things that are happening across the entire state and actually across the whole country, that we want to be sure we're aligned with. So I think those are two good points to add to this one. But you're right, Thomas. We want to move on to our next piece, which is I know the group has spent quite a bit of time talking about this one, and that's living wage. When we talked about data for living wage, we talked about Alice, we talked about comparing average starting salaries for particular jobs here or entry level salaries to those Alice wages for a kind of a realistic snapshot of what's going on. And then one thing that came up on our last call was wage data that includes the value add of benefits. So it's not just an hourly wage or a yearly wage of what you're making, but that the benefits contribute to that and presenting that in such a way that an individual person understands that better than maybe how it's currently presented to folks. And then we had lots of ideas for how this might end up playing out. We talked about a workshop or a summit, a fair wage summit for employers so that there was some sort of level setting that could take place. We talked about improving the pipelines that get people out of the low wage entry level jobs more quickly. With the employers, we concede that there will always be those entry level jobs. A lot of some of them might end up going away. I know Wes was talking about AI earlier, so maybe some of those will kind of fall by the wayside because of AI, but there's always going to be entry level jobs. But how do we get people out of those if they choose to get out of those, if that's what their desire is? How do we move them along a pipeline faster and more efficiently? And again, we keep coming back to this idea too about working across all of the sectors. Again, that it's not sector specific, but identifying those living wage concerns that prevent workers from taking particular jobs or persisting in those jobs that impacts all of the sectors or most of the sectors. So I know we've spent as Thomas and I were kind of reviewing all of the things we've talked about in this group, this one seems to be one we've spent a fair amount of time on. So I just want to be sure when we present this to the group on the 9th that we're not leaving things out because there was quite a bit of information for this one. So interested what people have to say about this idea of living wage and either the data connected to it or some strategies for how it would play out. Or I guess there is another option. If you think that slide represents our conversations, you know, um, fairly well in order to talk to the rest of the groups about it on the 9th, then Thomas and I can pat ourselves on the back that we that we put that one together a little bit more efficiently.
I agree with you. You did a good job.
Okay. Okay. Hey, thanks, Wes. I appreciate a thumbs up. I always appreciate a thumbs up. So thank you for that. Thomas, there we go. On that one. Then wait a minute. There's something in the chat here. Oh, okay. just from our previous
It was from the
conversation?
previous, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Okay, let's move on to the next one then. So that was living wage, and that's fairly good. If you have something else, so if something comes to you, just please let Thomas and I know. But now economic diversification. And now this one and the next one is jobs for the future. And I feel like these are things that have been underlying what we've been talking about, but that we haven't necessarily specifically addressed. So I just want to be sure that we're kind of untangling it in ways that make sense for our presentation on the 9th. So we did talk, well, again, this is Thomas and I kind of somewhat reading between the lines here. So please let us know that for diversification of the economy, we could look at labor data by industry. So current data showing, well, where are the resources currently being used? And then Leslie mentioned predictive analytics, that we would use predictive analytics to show future growth trends and be like, okay, here's where the money's currently being used, and here's where we're headed in the future. So now how does it get rerouted? And then that last piece, then we would need to identify where to spend our limited time and resources and to triage it and figure this is what we have to do first, and then this is what we do next, and then this is what we do after that. So some things that we have talked about in this group that seem to fall under this diversification banner are things about creating additional economic outlooks for identified sectors or even for brand new sectors that don't exist yet. If we know they're coming, doing what does that outlook look like? How can we predict that and do that before it gets here? So it's proactive versus reactive, distinguishing between what is new and what will actually diversify the economy. Thomas and I, as we were talking, we were coming up with some examples of if a new tour company comes into Hawaii, it might create 50 new jobs, but it doesn't actually diversify the economy. If it's just a regular tour company like other tour companies that already exist here. So while something might create new jobs, it's not actually diversifying the economy. So kind of teasing that out and then putting things into categories about what's really going to diversify Hawaii's economy. And then again, our last bullet always gets back to this idea of, again, working across all of the sectors to identify growth areas within those that already exist. And this gets to Wes's earlier comment about, IT is already a sector, but the growth area within IT, or one of them, is AI. So do we focus on that piece of the IT sector as opposed to trying to focus on the entire IT sector? We focus on AI and the diversification of our economy that surrounds artificial intelligence and all of the new jobs that will go with that. So, as I said, this is Thomas and I reading between the lines a little bit and interpreting it and maybe inserting a couple things to give this a little bit more specific direction. So we are certainly curious to hear what everybody has to say about that one.
Okay, this is Leslie again, and it's my last time because I have to go into another meeting.
Yeah.
And I apologize being hands-free. I'm not seeing the video. So if I'm being redundant, my apologies. What I think about, you use the example of a new tour group coming in. So as an economic developer and with a mission to diversify the economy, what we have found out is the most effective way to do that is to focus on entrepreneurship. So, for example, we've seen so many companies come into Hawaii and then leave if they are not rooted here. So, our greatest, most effectiveness is taking like spin-off local residents. Like, for example, Boeing was here for years. We helped several of their engineers spin off and create that were UH grads, the homegrown ones, spin off their own companies, right? And give them the tools to compete with a government customer and, proof of concept. And they're the job creators that will stay. And I think that analogy, it crosses all sectors, whether it's in healthcare, whether it's in, whatever, clearly IT for sure. So I think that somehow focusing on entrepreneurship to grow homegrown companies that we know help diversify the economy and help them become job creators.
Great. Thank you, Leslie. That's an excellent point, and it belongs here. That point does belong on this slide. So I really appreciate your input on that one. And thanks for sticking with us, even though I know you're in transit someplace else. I'm so glad you're here.
Well, you are my peeps. You are my friends. So thanks. Where else would I be? Thanks for your work very much, Dan and Thomas. Much appreciated.
Thanks, Leslie. Great. I saw Wes giving a thumbs up as Leslie was talking. So Wes,
I agree with a lot of this stuff she's been saying in multiple categories, and now I kind of wish I didn't say anything earlier because you guys buried it in here. But one of the things on the slide with the data, does it contain already a set that shows the migration of current migrated workers going from one industry to another, that shows a trend of where people are going to help with the predict? And again, am I being redundant because I just, I was looking at the slide, but I didn't really dig into, that's my question, is actually, is it gonna have that also to be predictive?
yeah, we did not have that, but I love that. I mean, I feel like that is a really excellent point because I think we were thinking at it more of the jobs themselves. Where are they moving? Not the people who have those jobs. But that's just as, if not more critical. There's a limited number of people. So if everybody's leaving this job and going to this job, that might be great over here, but not so good over here. And it's hard just I always say this, when industry folks are like, we need more people, it's like, we can't make more people. The senior class at DOE is a set number of students. The DOE doesn't create more people. But that's an excellent point, Wes. And I think it should be reflected on this slide. So thank you. We will be sure that makes its way onto this one.
And the second one, as far as diversification, is it also looking at partners in other, and I'll just call it time zones, but you could go either direction. So to partner with businesses on the East Coast, because for Hawaii, that's 9 to 5, but that's overnight for an East Coast company that could potentially be then working 24/7. And how does that workforce, is that something that was also engulfed in this, or is it still just really looking at just employment and businesses on the island?
No, I think we should. I know, Thomas, I see you shaking your head no, and I agree. Like it's not reflected there.
No,
So
it's not.
yeah.
Yeah, I would say, just this topic of entrepreneurship, and maybe Marshall and Nicolette, you guys could chime in on this one, but it seems like, at least in my experience with Good Jobs Hawaii, like I think even you, Dan, early on, and when you were doing Marshall's job, you and I had conversations about entrepreneurship, and it was kind of like, yes, but no, because within the context of the grant, right? It, like, entrepreneurship wasn't necessarily kind of the thing, but especially now as we're moving kind of into what would effectively be a year 4 of the Good Jobs Hawaii grant, or even beyond the Good Jobs Hawaii grant, this entrepreneurship thing is definitely kind of coming back. And I know it's being reflected in our creative industry sector partnership, and kind of this idea that like all the stuff that you were saying, Wes, these are all topics that are starting to pop up again, whether it's remote work or even and remote work, especially because of the different islands, right? Maybe Leslie could speak to that, and Marshall and Nicolette as well, being on Maui. Like there are these kinds of things where what kind of work would allow people to stay where they're at but still have a good job. And these topics are all kind of swimming around in different conversations that I've been having, and they're starting to rise up more, especially now that the grant is kind of sunsetting. Um, so yes, Dan, I think we definitely need to add these to this slide as far as kind of recommendations or ideas that are popping up, not just here in the Workforce Development Council context, but across all workforce development conversations, at least that I've been a part of.
Hey, Thomas, and Dan, I think this is a really, I really like this slide, and then just all the feedback that was received on it as well. I think it's really pertinent to the overall conversation. And then Thomas, just to continue on with what you were saying, we look at entrepreneurship. A lot of it also has been focusing on the types of incubators and accelerator programs that we're able to launch in, within the state. And I think that really describes Leslie's point as well too, of creating those incubator type programs with some project professionals under Boeing that allowed them to spin off. I think that's the type of climate that will really help promote that economic diversification. If we look across our state, a lot of that diversification is driven by small business owners that then are able to scale up. So that could be some other key language to possibly add in, and some strategies for different players within this conversation to kind of focus on.
Great. Thanks, Marshall. And I think, yeah, for this particular one, then we want to be sure that we reflect the idea of entrepreneurship, certainly. I think you're right. The small business piece here, I mean, it kind of goes hand in hand with entrepreneurship, in some ways, of course. But I feel like you're right, Marshall, that it kind of makes sense here too. And Wes, your notion about partnerships outside of the state of Hawaii that are in different time zones. Then what does that look like? And how can we leverage that and leverage our location going both east and west to be able to diversify our economy, even though it might not be actually housed here, but people can take advantage of that and have a good job. In a high paying job that allows them to stay, allows the individual person to stay in Hawaii. Great. Again, I know I got one eye on the clock, and we're coming into the home stretch here because our last piece are the jobs for the future. And again, like diversification, this has been an undercurrent. And it's even come up multiple times in our conversation so far today. Things about this particular piece, but we haven't talked about it as its own entity until kind of right now. And again, these are things that Thomas and I, as we were talking last week, we're kind of threading together as we see it as part of these jobs for the future. So part of that, though, is looking at, well, what are the national trends for job for the future? And this maybe gets to Wes's point too about we don't exist in a vacuum. We exist in an economic system that is larger than just our state. So what do those trends look like? And then how do those national trends, how could they or how do they intersect with Hawaii opportunities and Hawaii needs and the talent that is here in Hawaii? And then taking a look too about what current jobs in Hawaii are going to change or disappear in the next 10 years. There's a lot of work that's just maybe the job itself isn't going to go away, but it's going to look differently than it currently looks. But some of the jobs will go away and they'll be replaced with other things. And then there'll be other jobs. Training people for the jobs for the future can be complicated sometimes because we just don't know what that is fully going to look like. So that's part of what we talked of. Kind of these pieces have popped up before. And again, we come back to this idea, Leslie's earlier comment about predictive outlook, predictive economic outlooks, trying to identify those future jobs. And again, Thomas, I know DBED is in this business as well of looking, what's in the future. So I know some of that data. I don't know specifically what it is, but I'm confident it exists or people are working on that. And my final point, and if you can't tell that Thomas and I are seeing this as maybe an outcome, it's cross-sector work, that we're not focusing on any one sector in particular, but looking for those things that do cut across all sectors to identify those change areas within the existing sectors. Maybe entrepreneurship is that piece. Maybe that's something that cuts across everything, and we do focus there. Certainly IT and artificial intelligence might be another one. It cuts across everything, and it certainly has the potential to cut across everything. And maybe that's where the focus could lie. But interested to hear in our last few minutes that we have on the call, what people think about this slide and what we would like to share with the whole group when we meet on the 9th.
It's Uma. When we look at all of the different sectors, I always look at the sectors itself as a vertical, and I always look at AI and workforce as a
Hmm.
horizontal because it
Hmm.
crosses over everything, right?
Yeah.
So I think we have to approach it in that way. Like AI is going to cross every sector. We're going to have to like adapt and educate in a very customized manner, depending on the sector. And then at HEDC, we have emerging sectors. One is aerospace, and the other one is geothermal. So these are in discussions right now, but it is going to be an emerging sector within HEDC.
And Uma, I'm sorry, what is the overall title for that emerging sector?
There is no title, but what we're doing is we're in a we're at a process where we're having discussions with partners to
Hmm.
see and find out the feasibility of those sectors. It looks promising, but it's those partnerships with the external parties that we need to establish in order for us to plant the seeds here. Tibet is taking a huge lead on this with us. They want us to grow aerospace and geothermal here, but we are at a very introductory phase, I would say. We're in, yeah.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that and for clarifying.
Uma, I'm just curious. I know with the other HTDC things that I had a chance to chat with Trung. For those of you on the call who don't know, Trung Lam is the new what is he, the executive director or whatever you want to call it for the HTDC. Trung came over from Thrive Hawaii, I believe, from the what would be the tech sector, right? Um, I know like one of the opportunities there was there's a one broad opportunity that I know in line with the whole uh, the 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 renewable energy goals that the state of Hawaii has set. So I've heard people talking about the geothermal effort, and then also was it hydrogen fuel cell technology and setting up microgrids for the Department of Defense and those kinds of things. And then there's the other thing that Trung was talking about is getting really kind of granular in terms of what are the actual barriers for these future jobs. And one of the things he talked about is like if we could figure out the secret or top secret clearance thing for those Department of the Defense type of jobs, that would be, again, a future facing type of job and a specific kind of barrier that maybe, working with the DOE and with the University of Hawaii system and other partners, we could maybe solve for those problems. Uma, do you want to kind of share a little bit about that or am I kind of off base again? I'm just basing it off of different conversations I've had with folks over at HCDC.
We're in the process of developing our strategic plan, and in that process of developing the strategic plan, things might change. So I think we'll be able to answer that question early August after our ecosystem conference where we get more of an idea from our stakeholders too, because it's not just about public partner, it's not about the public sector, it's about public-private sector partnerships. We can drive the conversation, but we need the private sectors to come in and launch. So it's like trying to find that partnership and trying to use all of our resources, the funding that the state legislatures have given us, and directing it towards these initiatives so that we can have momentum into it and also ensure that they take that momentum and they deliver it. Because anytime you have any new ventures, it's a multi-layer process, right? So we have to make sure that we provide guidance along the way, but we want the private sector to actually roll with it. So I'll be able to answer that question in August.
Thanks, Uma.
Yeah, and
No,
I'm glad.
thank you.
Thanks for saying that, Uma, because I feel like that's another piece that I want to be sure is represented in our presentation on the 9th is the need for strong public-private partnerships. And again, I feel like it's an undercurrent in things, but I want to explicitly call that out. So thank you for saying that. It's a good reminder. Wes.
I just got, as Uma was talking, I was just getting super excited because I love that idea of those core services. So it's like, to me, it's like customer service, soft skills, AI. It doesn't matter where you go, you can use those. And then it's, when we go back a couple of slides, now it's, you're hitting two birds with one stone. I think that's a little too violent nowadays. It's you netted two birds in a bush. The other thing I wanted to say is something that she also hit on, which was the businesses. So on that slide, if we have the opportunity to now kind of culture change the new businesses where they're prepared for paid internships and they're bought into the workforce development system from the beginning, you get a different type of engagement. And a lot of what I'm hearing, and I totally agree with every number 5 on every single slide, all of the pillars need to be aligned. They need to be sharing information. I kind of look at it as almost branding and marketing. Across the board, everybody has the same format, same look, and they're sharing the same information. So I just excited, wanted to second on everything that everybody else was saying.
Great. Thanks, Wes. No, Wes, I appreciate your energy because and I'm glad your camera's on because I feel like I'm feeding off of your energy too. So yeah, thank you for sharing that and thanks for your enthusiasm. Wes, are you going to be there on the 9th? Are you coming in person?
Yes, I'll be
Excellent.
there.
Okay, bring that same energy on the 9th. We only have a few minutes left, but I wanted to be sure we gave space. I know Nicolette and Kazu, Kevin, Denise, not that you have to say anything, but I want to be sure that we have some space for you to share if there's something you would like to say. Hi, Nicolette.
Hey guys, thanks for giving the space. I don't think I actually attended all of these meetings in the past. I just saw it pop up on my calendar. So happy to see the progress you guys have made and the deep thinking for moving forward. Second, third, fourth, everything you guys are all talking about. I think some of the points that Leslie has raised in terms of like accessing Lightcast and some of that labor market data, I think that's a really key piece I would love to see come out of this pillar work. How can we better coordinate around tapping into this labor market data? We know that UHCCs use it a lot internally. How can we, make it accessible and through some kinds of partnerships? Come up with some standard reports and analysis that we can, use sustainably going forward. I think that'd be really helpful because we're kind of running these ad hoc reports like, okay, we have a proposal for a training for this particular occupation. Let's like vet how many jobs really are out there. What is the, the wages look like, things like that. But I think if we can, use it in a more consistent way, that would be really helpful to, assess labor market demand ongoing and help us prioritize the sectors and the occupations within them. I also agree with the idea of, looking to sustain our core sector partnerships, but also what are the other sectors that we haven't included in this analysis and this work? So, we get requests. Can we fund hospitality training, things like that through Good Jobs Hawaii? We haven't been able to do so through the federal grants, but as things are winding down, how can we, have that broader scope of this is our real economy. We can't just eliminate, not include it because of the past federal grants. So I think broadening that scope is going to be really important as well. So
Great.
those are kind of my top of mind thoughts. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. Oh, thanks, Nicolette. And I agree with you about the data. That it's like, yeah, it exists and there's a lot of it out there, but how can we more effectively use it and standardize the use of it? Yeah, it's important. Kazu, it's nice to see you.
Yeah, thank you. So I totally agree with what everyone has been talking about. And I think for a lot of new areas, it's overwhelming, right? To try to jump into this. They don't have the resources. So when you talk about data, you talk about best practices. And I what Wes said really resonated with me. It's culture change the new businesses. And I think it's really that introduction, right? And getting them ready for what's coming and making sure that we partner with the right sectors that are able to adapt and then taking all the things that are working in the strong sectors that we have now and taking those tools so that they're not having to recreate the wheel. We already have things set up. So quick wins for them so that they feel great about joining. They see the success and the momentum kind of goes there. For us, in utility, I think we look at the sustainability and the changes that are coming. So similar to AI, but, for our company, I think there's going to be a lot of changes to the jobs that we have and skill sets. So similar pathways for other companies as well as ourselves. So how do we make that change together?
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Kazu. And thank you for being here too. I always appreciate you and your team being very committed and showing up. So thank you for that. Marshall, I saw your comment and I agree. So thank you for bringing that up because I was thinking, I don't know, is Jobs for the Future a community college thing that only community college people? But I do. When I see it, I'm like, oh, I think of JFF.
Yep.
Yeah, so thank you for that. I think future ready jobs or something like that is probably a cleaner way to go. So thank you for kind of calling that out. Hey, we're at the end of our time. I hope all of you are able to be there on July 9th. And I hope Thomas and I do justice to the work that this cohort has already contributed to. We will go back to these slides. We will update them and fine tune them. Thomas, we have 10 minutes on the 9th, so we'll really have to be like this, but we can do, I
Oh
know we can
man.
do it. I believe in us.
Yes,
And
I do. I do.
yes, and this group has been really helpful. So thanks everybody for your input. Bennett, thanks to you and your team once again for kind of being the backbone to all of this. And then I didn't know, Bennett, did you have anything you want to say here right before we end the meeting? I'm gonna say no. I'm guessing she does not. That she does not. Okay. Sounds good, everybody. I hope to see all of you in person on the 9th.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a great rest of your day.